Hello and welcome to this special Christmas edition of Shed Talk, where we're going to take a look at the red budgerigar. I expect you, like me, have come across on Facebook and other places pictures of red budgerigars, and like everybody else, we've dismissed them as being fakes and frauds. We know people have been trying to breed that red budgerigar, that stuff of legends, the Holy Grail, for years and years and years, unsuccessfully. People have tried cheating by dyeing the bird or tricolour feeding them to produce the red pigment in the budgerigar. Like I say, in all cases so far, unsuccessfully. But why is that the case? And is it so set in stone? Well, in this episode, we're going to take a special Christmas journey looking at the red budgerigar through the eyes of that eminent budgerigar breeder, Uriah Pecksniff, with the help of 3 Christmas ghosts: Christmas Never, Christmas Thoughtful and Christmas Hopeful. So why not sit back, grab yourself a cup of tea and enjoy the story of Rudolph the Red Budgerigar, a Christmas miracle. Uriah Pecksniff. Uriah Pecksniff kicked the snow off his boots as he reached the door to his house. He had just been out to the shed, did one last final check of his birds before he shut it up to settle down and enjoy the rest of Christmas Eve. Uriah was a short, slightly overweight, middle-aged gentleman of modest means. His hair was both greying and thinning at an alarming rate. One might say he was a rather typical bird keeper. His bird of choice was the budgerigar. He loved the variation of colour and patterns. From the pied and the spangle through the golden face and lutino, they were all wonderful to his eyes. Uriah settled down in front of his log fire and removed his boots. He set about warming his toes and drinking his Ovaltine. He picked up a well-thumbed pitcher and began once again to examine it in great detail. The pitcher was of a red budgerigar. A fake, of course, he knew it, but he couldn't help wondering, with all those wonderful colours, why not red? After all, there were other parakeets and parrots that were red. Why not a budgie? His thoughts drifted like the snow that was falling outside. What would old Seth Fizzwig say if he saw him now? The Ghost of Christmas Never. Uriah awoke from his slumber. He was unsure of how long he'd slept, but the logs on the fire were now burning brightly and the embers were giving off a starlight brightness all of their own. At first he wondered what had disturbed his sleep, then noticed a tapping on the window. He wiped away the sand dust from his eyes and brought them into focus. It was a jackdaw, tapping on the window. Its silver crown reflected the frost on the window pane. Then Uriah felt a shudder. He realised there was another person in the room, or at least it embodied a person in shape, but its translucent body suggested something else. Uriah stared at the strange phantom. It was taller than him and had a thinness about its face. Its face was old, with eyes that did not see all that was before it. And worse, even more than the chains that bound both its feet, was its smile. A knowing and scornful smile that said, "I know more than you, Uriah." Then suddenly the ghoul spoke to him. "Pecksniff, Pecksniff, why do you waste your time and thoughts on such stupidity?" It was only then that Pecksniff noticed the picture of the Red Budgie in the ghost's bony hand. "What? Who are you?" said Uriah. "What are you?" The spirit looked down on Uriah and spoke clearly. "I am the ghost of Christmas Never. I am here to show you why you are foolish to even consider the Red Budgerigar. Come with me, Pecksniff, and I will guide you away from such delusions." With this, Uriah felt a tug on his sleeve, and his surroundings became a blur. Mr Fizzwig's lecture. When things returned to normal, Pecksniff found himself standing at the top of a large round gallery looking down onto a scene of gentlemen discussing a number of bird-related topics. He realised he was in a lecture hall, and the person at the centre of the discussion below was none other than Mr Seth Fizzwig. Fizzwig was a round man with a balding head. On his nose was a pince nez, which made him look more distinguished than he actually was. In front of him was a small green bird with a yellow face in a cage. Pecksniff recognised the bird as a light green budgerigar. "You see," continued Fizzwig, who Uriah and the ghost of Christmas Never had joined mid-lecture, "the bird is essentially made up of three colours, produced in three different ways. First is the ground colour. This is true pigment, and in the budgerigar is yellow," Fizzwig stated. "Unlike many other parrots and parakeet species, the budgerigar is not able or lacks the ability to produce orange or red pigment." This was said in an earnest and with an element of finality in his voice. "Now," he continued, "the yellow extends beyond the face and wings and down the body. So why does it appear green?" While Seth Fizzwig posed this as a question, it was said in such a way that he was not expecting a response. "Well, let me explain. It is not as many might think," Seth said with a smile and removing his pince nez from his nose. "From a blue feather pigment mixed with the yellow." There was a pause, and he replaced his pince nez. No budgerigar species can produce blue pigment any more than the budgerigar can produce red." Mr Fizzwig went on to explain how the structure of the feather and how this interacts with the light that is passing through it that creates the appearance of blue. This, along with the yellow pigment, makes the green. There was much nodding of heads and mumbling of "yes, good point." "So that leaves the final element," continued Fizzwig, "the black or grey, though through to the light brown of cinnamon." The assembled group discussed how these colours are produced by two different types of melanin. After much discussion, says Fizzwig, began to sum up. "We can see that this simple combination of three different means of producing colour can result in the wonderful colour that we now have, and have been produced by respected breeders like yourselves. However, even we cannot defy the laws of nature and produce the red that is not present in the bird." This received much laughter around the lecture theatre, and to Uriah's surprise he found himself being transported back to his living room. The Ghost of Christmas Thoughtful. As he got up from the chair, Uriah was still somewhat confused by what had just happened. The picture of the red budgerigar lay on the floor next to the fire that was now burning lightly, as if many hours had passed. It took a short while for him to become aware of a tapping on the window. A little surprised by the sight of a large, baggy-trousered crow staring back at him through the snow-covered panes, having expected to find a jackdaw. Uriah turned to find a different spirit watching him from the door. This ghoul looked shorter than himself, with eyes that seemed to dart around the room, without pausing on anything in particular. Without being asked, the phantom spoke. "I am the ghost of Christmas Thoughtful. Come with me and we will look again at your aspirations for the red budgerigar." Uriah could not help notice that the leg iron that bound it was only fitted to a single leg, the other being free. It was also only now that Pecksniff noticed that the ghoul was holding the picture of the red budgerigar in his left hand. The other took hold of his own, and they left the room like a swirl of smoke, leaving an old clay pipe. A visit to Harriet Bunsby. They arrived in the garden of a large house. Uriah looked around, and through a window of the house he could see a group of children and women playing games and eating what looked like warm mince pies and cream. However, it was the scene in front of him that interested him the most. In front of a large aviary stood an elderly woman and a young boy. Pecksniff assumed the boy was the grandchild of the woman. Again, without any prompt, the Ghost of Christmas Thoughtful spoke. "This is the home of Harriet Bunsby," it said. "She is a fine breeder of budgerigars, but only breeds one colour." With this, they both moved forward so they could overhear the conversation between the boy and Harriet. "Grandma," said the boy, "why are all your birds blue?" "That is the only colour for me, Timothy," said the woman. "You see," she went on, "the blue budgerigar cannot breed any green birds. They simply are not able." Tim looked a little bemused and said, "Why is that? Are they different species of budgerigar from the green ones?" "Oh no," smiled the old lady. "They are the same budgerigar. It's just that they cannot produce yellow pigment. It no longer works." She thought for a moment and then continued, "You might say it is switched off. Of course, if we introduced a green bird to the flock, then they could begin to produce green birds again. But so long as I only keep blues, there will be no greens in my aviary." The young boy considered this for a moment and then asked, "How come it's switched off?" Mrs. Bunsby explained how a gene in the bird had mutated and that this is how new varieties and colours can be produced. Once again, Tim was deep in thought and then asked, "Could the gene not mutate back again so that the green can be produced?" This caught Harriet a little bit by surprise, and after a while she spoke. "Yes, I think that would be possible, but very unlikely." Uriah found himself once again being transported back to the living room. The Ghost of Christmas Hopeful. Uriah was not surprised to hear the now familiar tap-tap-tapping on his window pane, and he wondered which bird was making the noise now. As he approached the window he smiled and thought, of course, what else could it be? After all, it was Christmas Eve. He turned away from the wintry robin redbreast and looked at the new apparition standing in front of him. Now the fire was merely an embers in the grate. It spoke, as if expecting to be asked, "I am the ghost of Christmas hopeful." Uriah noticed that this spirit had no chains to bind it, and his eyes were firmly fixed upon Uriah. "I am here to take you on the final part of this journey." With this, Pecksniff once again found himself being transported to another place. A note from Dr. Chuzzlewit. When the fog cleared, they were both now standing in an office. It had fine wooden panels housing a great number of books. At one end was a very substantial oak desk. Uriah wondered for one short moment how they had got it into the room. It looked far too big for the door. Sat at the desk was a very distinguished looking gentleman holding a number of papers in his hands. Behind him on the wall was a framed certificate that read, Dr. William Chuzzlewit, Doctor of Zoology and Ornithology. On the desk lay a large book entitled Parrots and Parakeets of Australasia by Dr. W. Chuzzlewit. Pecksniff guessed correctly that the person that sat at the desk, looking very pleased with himself, was none other than Dr. Chuzzlewit himself. Chuzzlewit got up from the chair and began to read aloud from the papers in his hand. Dear gentlemen, further to our recent correspondence relating to the small Australian parakeet, Melopsittacus undulatus, or more commonly known as Budgerigar, I have looked at great depth at this species, and I can come to no other conclusion that this is the sole member of the genus Melopsittacus, and that the Budgerigar has no closely related living species or relative. My investigation would suggest that the closest living relative to this bird would be those members of the lories and lorikeets, and they may share similar common ancestors and so some common genes. Dr. William Chuzzlewit went on to explain how he had come to this conclusion, much of which was full of words and explanations that Pecksniff did not understand, and nor did he care much about, for his attention had been drawn to another book on the desk. This was opened at a page entitled Lorikeets. On this page were a number of fine drawings of these wonderful little parrots. Most of the pictures showed birds that were clearly had red in their plumage. It was only when Chuzzlewit stood up from his desk that Uriah realised he had finished talking and was now sealing the letter in an envelope addressed to the Zoological Society, London. With one final look at the pictures in the book, Uriah found himself back in his chair in front of a smouldering log fire. Christmas morning. This time there was no tapping on the window, nor any sign of ghoul or ghost in the room. Uriah thought long and hard about what he had just witnessed. Of course he realised it had just been a dream, but still, the blue Budgerigar could no more produce yellow than the green Budgerigar could produce red. And yet, Uriah said aloud, they both share the same genes, only had them switched off through an accident of nature. He thought about the lorikeets in the book. Surely they did share genes with the Budgerigar. Then what if one had produced the red in the lorikeet was just switched off in the Budgerigar? Was it possible? And could young Master Timothy, as suggested to Mrs Bunsby about the blue Budgerigar, could it just be switched back on again? He stood at the window, looking at the virgin snow that lay on the garden. He smiled to himself and wondered what old Seth Fizzwig would say, then turned and said aloud, "Merry Christmas to you all."